Every kid remembers the sound of a school bus, the hiss of the doors sliding open, the rumble of an aging diesel engine, the chatter of voices carrying across rows of faded vinyl seats. For many of us, that sound meant routine, ordinary mornings, and the comfort of knowing we'd get from home to school and back again without thinking twice. Buses are supposed to be safe. They symbolize childhood. Yellow steel and flashing red lights meant protection, order, even innocence. At least, that's what the world wants us to believe. But spend enough time digging into what really happens on those long back roads in the early morning darkness or after late night games when headlights carve shapes across rural routes, and you'll realize not every ride home delivers you safely to your driveway. Some buses carry more than children. Some seats stay empty for good reason.
This isn't about stories told around campfires. These are accounts claimed to be true, the kind whispered years later by people who still look over their shoulders when they hear brakes sigh at an intersection. Stories about disappearances, strangers climbing aboard when they never should have, drivers who weren't who they claimed to be, and passengers nobody else seemed to notice until it was far too late. We trust buses because we're taught to. In fact, most parents don't think twice when their child is swallowed into those painted doors. But what if that trust is misplaced? What if some of the most terrifying moments don't happen inside a haunted house or the back roads of a movie theater, but right there, on the vinyl seat next to you, while the bus rolls forward? Tonight, you'll hear 3 accounts, 3 disturbing, supposedly true school bus horror stories.
When you live out in the country, riding this school bus feels less like transportation and more like exile. My stop was the very last one on the line, tucked near a stretch of woods where the power lines ended and the gravel roads swallowed tire tracks whole. Every morning, the bus would rattle through narrow curves, dropping kids one by one until it was just me, the driver, and the fading smell of rubber seats. Being the last stop meant long waits, too. I'd sit tucked in a jacket before dawn, dark trees crowding the horizon, watching headlights grow across the empty road. Sometimes it felt like the bus would never come, like the woods around me stretched thicker just to smother me in silence. That's when I noticed him. It was winter, freshman year. The air bit through my gloves and frost laced the fence posts. I thought I was alone until I saw a figure standing in the tree line, maybe 100 feet back. At first I told myself it was just a neighbor checking traps, but he didn't move. He just watched. The bus shuttered up the road and I climbed on quick, turning once to see if he was still there. He was. I kept hoping it was coincidence, shadows shifting between branches, but for the next week, every time the bus dropped me off or picked me up, I saw him, always in the tree line, always waiting.
At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking it. When you're 14, your imagination scrambles toward anything frightening. Still, a week stretched into 2, and the figure in the woods didn't go away. Sometimes he was just barely visible, the curve of a shoulder behind bark, a pale oval of a face where the branches thinned. Other mornings, he crept closer, standing right at the fence line. One evening, when the bus dropped me off, he was so near I could see the outline of ragged clothing and hair dripping lank across his forehead. I ran straight for the porch, heart hammering against the storm of my breath. I tried explaining it to the driver, Mr. Hanley, a wide-shouldered man who chewed toothpicks like they were candy canes. One afternoon, I gestured at the trees, blurting, "Someone's watching me." His jaw shifted, but his eyes didn't follow my finger. He only muttered, "Sit down, kid," and closed the doors, hauling the bus away with a hiss of brakes. Other students whispered, too. The route was half empty, mostly younger kids, but a girl named Angie leaned across the aisle once and asked, "Do you see him too?" My stomach tightened. "You've seen him?" I whispered. She nodded nervously. "By the fence. My brother says he used to ride this bus years ago." I wanted to laugh it off, call it a story meant to scare me, but she didn't smile.
When I asked more, she shrugged and refused to meet my eyes again. As the days stacked on, the man's presence felt heavier. Birds avoided the tree line when he was there. On frosty mornings, his breath plumed even though he stood still. And once I swore I saw his lips moving, murmuring words that didn't quite carry. By the end of January, I dreaded both ends of the ride, the waiting darkness of the pickup, and the hushed silence when I was the last one sitting. Every seat empty behind me, the reflection of the woods stretching across window glass. And every time I stepped down the narrow bus stairs, he was there, watching, always closer.
One Friday in February, heavy snow pushed dismissal late. By the time we piled into the bus, night had already swallowed the countryside. Pale moonlight glared off drifts, and the heater blasted air that smelled faintly of rust. Students thinned stop by stop until I was the only one left. The road twisted darker the farther we rolled. Branches bowed low with ice, scraping the windows like claws. I hunched near the front, reading the back of the driver's jacket, wishing he'd turn the radio up louder. His silence made the humming engine feel like the only sound in existence. When the headlights broke through the last corner, my stomach dropped. The man wasn't in the woods anymore. He was standing in the middle of the road, square in my stop, snow coating his shoulders like ash. His body cast a long shadow across the drifts, and though the beams swallowed his face, I sensed he was smiling. I gasped, but before I spoke, the bus slowed. Mr. Hanley didn't hit the brakes hard or swerve away. He simply eased up as if he'd been expecting him. The air inside turned heavy. The bus hissed, squealed, and came to a stop. For a moment, I thought Mr. Hanley would roll the window down and yell at him to move. Instead, he flicked the latch. The doors folded open. A gust of cold slammed through, filling the aisles. The man stepped aboard. His boots left slush along the rubber floor. He didn't ask permission. He didn't look at me. He simply walked down the aisle, slow and creaking, past every empty row, and sat himself in the very back. I stared, frozen. My pulse pounded in my ears, louder than the whine of the idling engine. When the doors closed, the air sealed around us. I glanced at the mirror, desperate for comfort, but Mr. Hanley never looked back. He just shifted the bus into gear and drove forward as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Who is he? I whispered. Mr. Hanley didn't answer. The snow thudded heavier against the windows. Each streetlight we passed flickered, as though the bulbs themselves recognized something unnatural was on board. I considered running, bolting down the slope toward home, but the thought of moving, the thought of walking past that silent figure in the back row, pinned me to my peeling vinyl seat. That was the night I realized, whatever this man wanted, the driver knew. And I was the only one left for him to reach.
The bus rattled forward, its headlights dissolving into curtains of falling snow. I kept stealing glances over my shoulder, but the back row was cloaked in shadow. The man sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap as if he'd claimed that seat long before I boarded. At first, I convinced myself he was just some drifter Mr. Hanley took pity on, maybe cold, maybe lost. But the longer he sat there, the more wrong that explanation felt. Every time my eyes shifted away, something changed. When I looked back, there were fewer rows between us. At first, he was in the last seat. Then, without any sound of footsteps, he seemed one row closer, then another. I searched the floor for slush, for tracks, but the rubber aisle was dry. I swallowed hard, spinning toward Mr. Hanley. "Why is he here?" I asked. The driver's jaw clenched. He didn't answer, didn't even twitch. The silence sank fangs into me. When I looked back again, the bus was nearly empty. Panic bloomed hot in my chest. A moment ago, coats and backpacks had cluttered seats. Angie's sketchbook was still lying open across vinyl, but row by row, they were gone. School bags, jackets, evidence of kids I'd shared the ride with.
It wasn't just memory. I sat there watching things vanish like chalk scrubbed from a blackboard. And then I realized it wasn't the objects disappearing, it was the people. I turned toward Mr. Hanley again. The mirror reflected not me, not him, only the man, his face stretched thin, all teeth and no lips. I gasped, spinning back. For just a moment, I caught him only 2 rows behind me, body rigid, smile frozen like a photograph. My mouth dried. "What do you want?" slipped out before I could stop it. The bus groaned as it rounded a turn. No answer, just the hiss of brakes as Mr. Hanley slowed near my driveway. Relief surged, but when the doors opened, it wasn't my porch light I saw. The gravel road melted into a tunnel of bare trees, stretching longer than any street in town. Shadows thickened until only blackness yawned beyond the threshold. The man shifted forward, boots finally thudding once against the aisle. For the first time, he stood close enough for me to see his eyes, pale, unblinking, like ice left too long outside. Mr. Hanley whispered without looking at me, "All right, he's here for you now."
My body rejected the words before my brain processed them. The bus doors hissed wider, snow howling through the opening, and Mr. Hanley's knuckles whitened against the wheel. He never turned, never looked at me, just repeated, almost to himself, "He's here for you now." The figure stepped closer, treadless boots thudding softer than they should. The aisle seemed to stretch and shrink all at once, the distance collapsing with every blink. He leaned halfway into the light, and I saw his mouth widen, each tooth long and wet, a grin that split too far up both cheeks. I bolted. Before he closed the gap, I darted from my seat and lunged toward the opposite window. My shoulder crashed against cold glass, and adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I carried. The pane cracked, then burst outward in a snow-whitened explosion. I tumbled into a drift, the world spinning sideways, icy burn shocking me awake. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of his steps in the aisle, followed by the muffled slam of doors snapping shut. I staggered to my feet, lungs buckling, legs pumping blind into the woods. Branches whipped my face, icy shredded my gloves, but I didn't stop. Not until my own porch light bleared faint across the trees did I dare turn back. The road was empty. No headlights, no bus. No sign I'd left a glass-smeared hole behind. Only the silence of snow, and somewhere hidden in its hush, the memory of that grin.
I never rode that bus route again. My parents told the school I'd take rides from neighbors or family, though I rarely explained why. Within a year, the county shut that road down, citing erosion and disuse. The bridge at the far end collapsed into itself, swallowed by trees. But some nights, when winter drapes the windows in frost, I swear I still hear the hiss of brakes outside. Sometimes I wake certain there's a face watching from the glass, smiling wide, teeth too long, waiting for me to step aboard, waiting for me to finally take the last stop.
Elementary school mornings in winter always bled together. The sky still dark, the air sharp enough to bite through layers, my breath puffing like smoke as I waited near the end of our driveway. Usually the grumble of the bus engine was a relief, the same familiar sound. The same driver, Mrs. Keller, always greeting us with a warm nod before flipping the radio on low. But one morning, she wasn't there. The bus doors opened with their usual hiss, except the face behind the wheel was wrong. A man I'd never seen before grinned widely down at us. He looked official enough, cap, jacket with the school district logo, even a laminated ID badge clipped to his chest. Yet something about the way he held the wheel, hunched and stiff, made my stomach sour. "Morning, kids," he said too cheerfully, voice high like he'd been practicing human pleasantries in a mirror. We climbed aboard hesitantly. The bus smelled different, too. Cleaner, somehow. A sterile chemical hint, not like the usual muddy boots and peanut butter sandwiches.
His eyes tracked us in the overhead mirror, smile never softening, just stretched and unwavering. I asked where Mrs. Keller was. He chuckled and said she was sick, but he said it the way you repeat a line you've memorized, not the way you explain something real. We shuffled to our seats, exchanging nervous glances down the aisle. And that was the morning I realized kids know before adults do when something's wrong, when someone doesn't quite belong.
The ride started normally, or at least close enough that no one panicked. We picked up kids at the same first 2 stops. The man waved too enthusiastically, like a politician faking friendliness. His grip on the wheel was knuckle white, but his smile never shifted. It wasn't until we passed Fairview Road that I noticed. The turn came and went. Usually Mrs. Keller curved right to head toward the elementary school. Instead, the bus rumbled straight, deeper into rural streets lined by leafless trees. I glanced at Eric across the aisle. He mouthed, "That's wrong." Another few twists later, we were sliding past houses I hadn't seen before. One kid, Jamie, in the front, asked loudly, "Aren't we supposed to go right?" The substitute laughed, but it didn't sound amused. "Temporary detour. Roads are closed. Sit back down." Jamie sank into his seat, biting his lip.
More stops appeared, but strangely, nobody waited at them. No kids in puffy coats with lunchboxes, just empty curbs, pale porches. We rolled by without pause. The longer the ride continued, the stranger it grew. Street signs didn't look familiar, they weren't even the same color anymore. Rusting green faded into off-white plaques, letters crooked as if they'd been hammered on yesterday. The windows layered with fog, trailing ice crystals, though the heater was blasting. The bus rounded a corner, and I swear the rows stretched longer. What had been 10 or 12 behind the driver now looked endless in the mirrors, a throat swallowing us further into shadow. Meanwhile, the substitute spoke again, low but sharp. "Don't look outside anymore, children. Just sit, keep your heads forward, everything is fine." Of course, telling us not to look made us look harder. And what I saw smeared through the frost was worse than anywhere school buses belonged. Yards filled with motionless figures, pale and stiff, staring without blinking. Burnt-out houses collapsing black against snow. It didn't match any neighborhood near ours. The rules from the laminated sheet back in Story 1 echoed in my head. If someone gives you strange rules, don't break them. But we didn't understand that yet. At least not until the scenery outside began changing faster than the tires beneath us could explain.
The bus grew so quiet I could hear the squeal of the tires against every patch of ice. Nobody dared speak until the substitute cleared his throat. "There are rules on this route," he said, voice suddenly low, stripped of the fake cheer. "If you follow them, you'll get where you're going. If you don't," he trailed off, smiling into the mirror, "then you'll learn what happens instead." Fear cracked through us like lightning. Kids shifted uneasily, clutching backpacks to chests. Jamie raised his hand timidly. "What rules?" The man ticked them off slowly on his pale fingers. 1. Keep your eyes straight ahead. Don't turn. Don't count the houses. 2. Don't speak unless I ask you a question. 3. Don't stand or switch seats, no matter what you hear. 4. If someone knocks on the windows, pretend you don't notice. And above all, never, ever call me sir.
That last one slashed through me like a blade. Why wouldn't we call him sir? Why forbid the word? He caught my gaze through the mirror, grinning wider. "You understand, don't you?" I nodded without meaning to, while dread coiled cold in my stomach. The younger kid started whimpering. One hiccuped, but when his sob cracked into sound, the driver snapped his head so sharply the cap nearly flew off. The boy froze like a statue, stuffing his fist against his mouth. I wanted to speak, to say this had gone far enough, but the rules wrapped around us like chains. No one dared break them.
because outside those fog-slick windows, shadows were gathering, and what little we saw hinted that maybe these weren't his rules at all. Maybe he was just repeating terms given to him, terms from something else rotting with us unseen.
The windows began to sweat with frost, blurring the outside world. But still, shapes pressed themselves against the fogged glass, as if begging to be seen. Shadows with two long arms, houses that leaned sideways, yards that faintly glowed orange like fire licking through walls. We weren't supposed to look. I remembered the driver's warning, heard it in my bones. Keep your eyes straight ahead. But when you're trapped and terrified, resisting curiosity eats you alive. A girl 2 rows up, Emily, wiped a circle into the fog with her mitten. I saw her freeze before she could tell the rest of us what she was seeing. I craned sideways just enough to glimpse. Across the frost-blurred pane was a house. Familiar siding, cracked porch, except it was burning silently. Flames didn't roar. They barely moved, licking black beams and stuttering, jerky frames, like a broken film reel. Out front stood a family, unmoving. Their skin gray, like statues left too long in winter. Black holes stared where their eyes should have been. All of them angled their heads toward Emily. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. "Eyes forward," the substitute barked. His smile never cracked. Emily snapped her head down, shaking. But it kept happening. Every time anyone disobeyed, the bus answered by showing more impossible sights. Roads looping endlessly into themselves, shadows glaring from yards, things waving through shattered windows. Something followed us just outside, teasing. One brave kid in the back, Marcus, muttered, "This is wrong." He leaned close to the glass anyway. The world outside changed instantly. The dark face of a man, hollow-eyed, pressed against the window right beside his cheek. Marcus screamed. The bus shuddered to a halt. The substitute rose slowly, standing taller than seemed possible in the cramped aisle. He grabbed Marcus by the wrist with inhuman strength, yanking him forward. "Off you go," he whispered. The doors sighed open. Cold fog spilled in, thick and suffocating. Marcus thrashed, crying, but when he crossed that threshold, sound vanished, like he'd been swallowed into another reality entirely. The doors clamped shut again. The driver sat back down, straightening his cap without speaking further. Nobody dared break the rules after that. I stared harder at the floor, shaking. My legs quivered like they wanted to bolt, but my instincts screamed. If I moved, if I drew any attention, I'd vanish too. I whispered prayers I'd never believed in. And through the windshield, further down a crooked road that didn't exist on any map, I saw lights flicker again, waiting houses, watching figures, and something darker pacing alongside the bus like it knew we were trapped.
The bus rumbled deeper into roads I didn't know existed, the windows dripping with condensation until they looked like veins. None of us spoke, not after Marcus. We sat paralyzed, clutching seats with white knuckles. The substitute kept driving with that awful smile, his eyes shining too wet in the overhead mirror. "See," he crooned, "not so bad. Behave and you make it home." But even he didn't sound convinced. The fog thickened, swallowing the world so completely we could no longer tell if asphalt lay under our tires. The motion felt wrong, like the bus rolled fluid instead of concrete. Light shimmered outside, too dim to be street lamps. Shapes pulsed beyond the glass, pressing their faces closer. A whisper threaded inside my skull. "Open the window." I clenched my teeth, frozen. The rules hammered in my head. Don't move, don't speak unless asked, don't look outside. Then the substitute glanced at me specifically, his lips curled like he'd been waiting. "Clever one. You understand the rules. That's why you'll make it."
I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. And somehow, the windshield revealed familiar terrain again. Houses, streetlights, snow-clogged corners I recognized from every school morning. The nightmare scenery evaporated like it had never existed. The bus screeched to a halt at my stop. Doors opened. "Run along now," he said, voice syrup sweet. I obeyed. My feet hit snow when I bolted home, certain if I looked back even once, I'd see darkness swallow me whole.
The next morning, Mrs. Keller was back behind the wheel, humming softly like always. When I asked why she'd missed yesterday, her brow furrowed. "I wasn't sick," she said. "The route was normal. I drove it." Confused, I pressed further, but my classmates only blinked at me. Nobody mentioned the substitute. Nobody admitted remembering Marcus. It was as if the nightmare had folded itself clean from their memories. But I remember the grin, the wrong roads, and the rules that kept me alive. And every winter morning since, I wonder, was that ride meant for me alone?
Friday nights in the fall always ended the same way, packed buses rumbling out from the high school after football games. The stadium lights still glowed as we crammed into vinyl seats, sweat and popcorn in the air, jerseys and band uniforms wrinkled with the night's effort. Laughter bounced louder than the engine. Nobody cared about space. Kids squeezed into aisles, some perched two to a seat. That's why nobody noticed him at first. He boarded just outside the stadium gates, moving with the shuffle of students. Head down, shoulders narrow under a dated Letterman jacket. Maroon, but old. The colors faded, patches stitched long before ours existed. He slid into a back corner, smiling faintly. I brushed it off. We didn't know everyone. Kids from other schools sometimes bummed rides when carpools failed. Still, something about his jacket caught me. It wasn't just faded, it was wrong. The mascot embroidered on the sleeve hadn't been used for decades. The bus jolted forward and conversations resumed. But as minutes passed, the cold crept in. Windows misted, exhalations puffing white despite the heater blasting. I pulled my hoodie tighter. That's when someone leaned over and whispered, "Who's that kid?" Heads turned discreetly, nods traded. None of us recognized him. He never spoke, never blinked, never took his eyes off the dark outside. The faint smile never shifted. At first, it felt awkward, but by the time we rolled out into country backroads, the air was so cold I saw frost lace the seats. And for the first time on a bus full of rowdy teens, every voice fell silent, because none of us wanted him to notice we were watching too.
At first, I convinced myself the stranger was just another exhausted kid. This bus was always overloaded after games, carrying band members, cheerleaders, and late-night stragglers, and faces sometimes blurred in the chaos. Still, I kept glancing back at him. Wherever I looked, his pose never changed. Shoulders square, hands folded in his lap, chin slightly angled toward the window. That faint smile glued itself to his face, the kind painted on for school photos no one really wants to take. It should have looked nervous, maybe shy. Instead, it lingered too long, too practiced. What unsettled me most was his eyes. He blinked maybe once every few minutes, and even then, his eyelids dragged unnaturally slow, like he wasn't sure how the mechanics worked. Other students noticed too. Lauren from marching band nudged me and whispered, "He's not from here, is he?" Her breath fogged in little clouds. I shook my head. As the bus rolled deeper into county roads, the temperature inside dropped further. The heater groaned on high, but it was useless. Our breath steamed white, windows crusting with thin frost webs. I rubbed my palms together, peeking back. Still that same posture. Still that same smile. But something changed. Whenever I looked away, the people seated closest to him shuffled farther down the aisle, without ever standing. 1 second, they'd be 1 row away. The next, 2. Then 3 rows, as if their seats slid backward when no one watched. The space around him grew. One boy finally whispered, "Hey man,
What's your name?" No answer. Not even the flicker of his eyes. He kept staring out at the woods. The boy muttered nervously, "Jerk," and looked away. I waited for the stranger to react, but nothing. He sat frozen in that same impossible stillness. The bus hit a long straight stretch with no lights in sight. Suddenly, the chatter died completely. I hadn't noticed how many voices had already ebbed until silence lay heavy, broken only by the continuous hum of tires. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe everyone was waiting for the same thing, to see if he would move. Someone whispered what we were all thinking. "Why is it colder back here?" I pulled my hoodie snug and forced my eyes forward, pretending not to notice that half the bus was slowly sliding into an unnatural hush, kids wrapping arms tight, like the cold belonged only to his corner. And in the mirror mounted above the driver's head, I finally saw it. His reflection wasn't delayed the way normal reflections were. It was a head, already smiling before his real mouth could. The bus should have been a 40-minute ride at most, but time stopped behaving normally. The darkness outside the windows stretched too long, roads looping back on themselves. I glanced out once, certain I recognized a crooked mailbox we'd passed 15 minutes earlier. The bus wasn't circling, the world outside was repeating. And then the lights began to stutter. Headlamps on the front of the bus flickered, throwing the world ahead into snapshots. I saw deer frozen on the roadside, then gone. A barn with its roof aflame, replaced by ice-thick trees in the blink of an eye. Every pulse of light revealed something worse, like the bus was a projector spitting glimpses of overlapping reels. Inside, conversations warped. A few kids whispered, half words, half static. When I leaned closer, my own friends sounded muffled, like their voices came through layers of water. My stomach dropped when I realized their lips weren't moving in sync. The sound came before their mouths shifted. I checked the stranger again. He hadn't moved, but the space around him grew sharper. Where the rest of the bus blurred under dim lights, his seat and limbs looked too clear, almost lit by a glow only he could produce. His faint smile hadn't faded, though now it was wider. Wide enough that the corners of his lips cracked into pale fissures at his cheeks. Someone muttered something about yearbooks. My ears perked. The girl across the aisle, nervous and pale, whispered, "My brother saw a photo when he was in the archives. Same jacket, same face. Kid died in the 70s, in a bus crash." Her friend hushed her quickly, but the words clung to me like frostbite. The driver never looked back, never said a word. His head dipped low, steering as though blind, following roads that bent impossibly into graveled stretches I knew belonged nowhere near our town. The rows themselves began to feel wrong. When I tried to count them, there were more than I remembered, spaces stretching, seats multiplying, as if the bus were unfolding into a cavern. Yet, every time I blinked, it was the same narrow aisle again, except the stranger's seat never shifted, always there, always visible. And now, his reflection no longer matched him at all. When I glanced at the driver's mirror, the boy in the reflection was staring, mouth open in a grin too full of teeth. But when I whipped around, his head was still angled toward the window, smile faint and calm, like he hadn't moved in hours. That was when I finally believed this wasn't a prank or a stranger catching a late ride. He wasn't with us at all. We were with him. The driver never announced a stop, never called out intersections. The bus just kept swallowing distance. My friends clutched their instruments and jackets, their chatter crushed by the growing chill. Then I noticed the turn. We weren't heading toward the main road anymore. The tires crunched onto a stretch of cracked asphalt lined in crooked stone posts. My throat ran dry. I knew this path. Cemetery Road. The football team used to dare each other to sprint from one gate to the other, swearing they'd seen lights in the graves. Nobody ever won that dare. "Why are we going this way?" Lauren hissed. Nobody answered.
The stranger finally moved. Only his head at first. Tilting toward us, his smile stretched wider, skin drawn thin until the corners split higher. His eyes met mine in the dim flicker of the overhead bulb. I stiffened. The bus slowed. Its headlights swept across a wall of gravestones, tilting them sideways in distorted shadows. The frost along the windows thickened until it looked like webs pressing inward, trapping us. Then, the stranger stood. No one told him to. No one dared speak. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, like a puppet tugged up by unseen strings. His jacket hung too old, too heavy, patches from a team that no longer existed. I caught my reflection again in the driver's mirror.
The stranger in the reflection had no face left. It was a hollow blur, a smear of shadow with teeth dropping endlessly forward into a grin that didn't stop widening. My chest clenched as if those teeth were around me already. The bus shuddered. Tires lurched to a stop directly in front of the cemetery gates. The driver's shoulders stiffened, but he never turned. Not once. The boy in the jacket began walking down the aisle. Each step toward us pushed the temperature lower. Our exhalations misted, icicles forming along the seams of the bolt-tight windows. Nobody moved, feet rooted. I wanted to run, but instinct pinned me exactly where I sat, as if his approach flipped something ancestral inside me, prey frozen in headlights. Closer. Closer, his smile reaching impossible proportions, teeth now sharp, lips split raw and curling to his ears. He stopped in the center of the bus. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular. He just inhaled, a sound so deep it rattled my seat, a sucking pull like he was drawing all the heat and breath out of the air. My friends whimpered, holding their mouths shut, silent tears glazed over. And then, without another word, he turned his head and looked straight at me. I didn't blink, couldn't breathe. The driver wrenched the gear shift suddenly, the bus lurching forward with an ear-splitting screech. Headlights jerked, beams slicing across the graveyard. For half a second, the boy's body shimmered like glass in water. Then, there was only his seat again, empty. Wet with condensation. The frost on the windows released its grip. My friends gasped as air rushed back in, hot from the heater again, as though nothing had happened. Nobody spoke the rest of the ride.
The bus pulled into town like nothing had changed. Kids stumbled off numbly, dazed and frozen, none daring to look at each other, as though speaking might drag that thing back. The seat in the corner stayed empty, slick with condensation, until it finally evaporated into the heater's dry wheeze. I didn't tell my parents. I barely remembered trudging inside or collapsing into bed. But the next week, my fear made me linger in the library archives after school. I needed proof that I hadn't imagined everything. What I found twisted my stomach cold. Old yearbooks, their pages yellowed, held team photos from the 1970s. A football captain grinned proudly in a maroon jacket nearly identical to the one I'd seen. Same face, same slanted smile. But the margins told the rest. Deceased, 1974. Bus accident on Cemetery Road. Team never arrived home. I dropped the book. All at once, the image of frost-covered windows and his reflection smiling ahead of time slammed into me. He wasn't some lost kid. He was a passenger tied to that route, dragged back year after year to relive one trip that never ended. I quit riding the bus after games, begged for rides or walked miles rather than risk another night. Still, the memory follows me. Every time I see school buses after dark, their windows rattling with kids laughing, I can't help staring harder. Because sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of a jacket too old, a face too pale, sitting silently near the back corner, smiling.
School buses aren't supposed to be frightening.
They're painted bright yellow for safety, wrapped in stop signs and flashing lights meant to protect kids. They're more than transportation, they're symbols of routine, innocence, and trust. But after hearing stories like these, that image feels hollow. Because what if trust is the real bait? What if the familiar rattling engine hides more than sleepy mornings and tired evenings? What if sometimes the stranger outside, the wrong driver, or the smiling passenger who shouldn't exist, isn't just imagination, but something waiting for children too young to question it? The scariest part isn't that these stories were told, it's that so many of them sound true. They resurface in whispers, in forums, in late-night confessions from people who never forgot a bus ride that ended differently than it should have. So, next time you climb the steps of a bus or watch red lights flashing down the street, remember, travelers don't always make it home. Drivers aren't always who they appear to be, and sometimes the most dangerous seat is the one no one recognizes. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and if you enjoyed these stories, like, subscribe, and share your own disturbing bus memories below.